Welcome, welcome, welcome in, everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We appreciate you joining us today. This is our first session of the new year. Happy New Year to each of you. On today's presentation, I hope the year brings you joy and peace and prosperity and good health. Wish that for everyone. We do, if you're new to us, CEUs every Monday of each month, or most every Monday at noon via Zoom. And this is the first of not only the year, but the first of a series that we'll do throughout the year on social work supervision, because our topics, as many of you know, are chosen from topics suggested by former attendees. And it's become obviously important for social workers to have CEUs in supervision, and that's why we're trying to meet the need. If you're new to us, if you're not familiar with CarePatrol, we are aging care navigators. And what that means is that we meet our clients where they are. They may be in a planning stage, they may be in a bed, in a hospital, or into rehab, or in their own home. We meet them, we assess them, and we help them determine what are the next steps in their caregiving journey, what agencies or types of care or levels of care may be needed, how to qualify and how to pay for those. And we offer all of that advice and all of our services, including touring communities, for free. We're paid if and only if our advice includes and is obviously ready for community placement. If someone is qualified and can afford it and meets all of those other hurdles and it's a safe and appropriate place, then we would be paid by those providers. We're a referral service, sometimes we're called, although I prefer to think that we capture many more elements of the journey than simply just the referral itself. In fact, about 60% of the people who contact us are not people who qualify for our services in order for us to be paid, but we help them anyway. We give them the same advice and education for free that we're giving you today. And I hope you'll remember that if you have someone who maybe needs a little more help or hand holding or has mentioned placement in a community but doesn't know where to start, remember us. Remember Care Patrol. Give us a call. We'd love to be able to show you how we help and how we do what we do, and just appreciation for you allowing us to do so. Letting some folks in. Today's topic, again, was suggested to us by a former attendee, best practices in social work supervision, and we try to answer the needs of you all. And we'll ask you in today's evaluation what topic you might like to see. And in fact, you must do the evaluation if you want to get credit for being here today. And we do provide a password protected system to our evaluation. So I'm going to give you now, those of you who are used to being with us know that we'll read for you the evaluation link. That way, if you're on your phone or driving or however you may be catching us today, if you're not able to see the screen, let me read for you now our password protected evaluation link. And we give the password out at the end today. And the reason we do this is that the Alabama Board of Social Work says that if we do this, this hour will be considered a live hour or a classroom hour for our social workers versus a recorded hour. Hence our password protected evaluation. The link, for those of you who are able to write it and ready to write it down, is https://www.surveymonkey.com/lowercase r/ all uppercase letters with numbers Y, 5, C as in cat, 6, M as in Mary, Y, 9. That's our evaluation link for today. I've also posted it in the chat room. We'd love to have you join us through the chat room. If you're new to Zoom and not familiar, just move your cursor up to the top of your screen or down to the bottom. A black bar will appear with the word chat on it, and join in the discussion. I am a wholehearted and steadfast believer that these sessions are better when you add your voice, that two voices are almost always better than one, and that your experiences in the field, your observations, your outcomes are worthy of sharing with other people and will be necessary, or not necessary, but certainly nurturing and helpful for other people. So we do encourage discussion, and I hope you'll have the confidence and the courage today to speak up. This again is accredited by the Alabama Board of Social Work and of Nursing. It's 1.0 contact hour. The evaluation is password protected. We give the password at the end. Everyone must do the evaluation to get credit for the day, and we'll be loading the nursing hours for nurses onto the ABN website within the week. Everyone will receive an evaluation certificate and the presentation itself in an email who do the evaluation. Let's hit our objectives real quickly. And this is a broad brush topic. Again, this is the first in a series. We're going to go deeper into the topic of supervision later in the year. Our first objective is to discuss the need for and the role of the social work supervisor. Objective 2, and best practices in social work supervision. We're going to list qualifications and some key self-directed questions that you would want to ask yourself if you're thinking about being a supervisor. And then objective 3, we're going to provide the National Association of Social Work and the American Social Work Board best practice standards, hence the title. So I want to ask you and get the conversation flowing. Have you been asked to perform the work of supervisor, or have you done the work of supervisor? If so, we'd love to hear more about your experience in the chat room, or if you are so bold and you want to unmute, we'd love to hear your voice. Just let me know. I'll unmic you and you can share your experience with us. Have you been asked to perform the work of a supervisor in your practice? We'd love to hear from. So today's topic, as we've discussed, is going to be from the Association of Social Work Boards. I misspoke. I called it the American. The Association of Social Work Boards and the National Association of Social Workers, developed the best practice standards that we will unveil later in this presentation. And they did so for this simple reason of supporting and strengthening professional social workers. The standards that they created provide just a very general framework, but that framework provides uniformity, and it serves as a resource for both the supervisor and the supervisee in the relationship. So those of you working in social work know that the knowledge base is expanded as our population has become more complex. Ms. Sigger says, when I was working in an office setting, I was the social work supervisor for BSW students. That's awesome. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear more from you about that. If you feel that it's important and would be helpful, that'd be great. It's important that, and Ms. Siggers knows from her work, that new social workers are equipped with the necessary skills to deliver competent and ethical social work services. And of course, when you're in the supervisory role, it's equally important for you to be there to protect clients. And now the supervision role protects clients. In addition, it supports the practitioner, the new social worker, and it ensures that professional standards are being met. This serves as foundational to the supervision process that we'll look at now. So professional supervision is relationship. And that relationship is one in which both the supervisee and the supervisor recognize some responsibility and accountability for the development of that relationship and for competent ethical practice to take place as a result of that relationship. The supervisor, of course, is responsible for providing direction to the supervisee, and the supervisee is using their social work theory and standardized knowledge and skills and competency and trying to apply ethical practices on top of that in the practice setting with the support of the supervisor. Ms. Kathy says, I was also a supervisor for BSWs, but that was before they changed the law, and you now have to take a class to officially be a supervisor. And we'll talk about that briefly. Social work is a profession of doing. It's not social studies. It's not social theory. It's social work. And social work is very simply the application of knowledge with practice and with others, practice with others. Supervision then should be an application of practice. So teaching new social workers how to actually put into place what they know from book learning, so to speak. And we know that because the social work is a demanding profession, social workers would also be connecting with their supervisees on how to emotionally handle the hurdles of being a social worker when you are someone who forms deep and sometimes very personal emotional bonds. Supervisee or supervisors rather can help supervisees sort of navigate this and develop creative strategies for how to get the job done in the face of all of the things facing the client and social work relationship. Is the need for social workers and thus supervisors growing, do you suppose, or is it pretty much steady where it is? What would y'all say? Would you say that the need for social workers is growing? And thus supervisors? Miss Alexander says, oh, well, lots of good. Yes, it is growing. Miss Alexander, I worked in the role of a supervisor for 9 months, and I worked with individuals that I worked with. It was extremely difficult and stressful. They did not want to do their job, so I gave it up. That's so interesting. I think there's always been a need, and you're all correct. There is a need. In fact, the Board of Labor Statistics projects that the employment of social workers will grow by 9% over the 10-year span from 2021 to 2031. And just so you know, that's faster than any other profession. 9%. The need for healthcare social workers, in fact, will grow by 11%. And this is largely driven by the population that CarePatrol looks at, which is the aging population. But there will also be growth by 11% projected for mental health and substance abuse social workers as more and more drug offenders seek and receive treatment as a response to the opioid crisis. And even in the child and family and school social worker arena, we'll see growth of 8% over that 10-year span. And this, of course, goes to parents being increasingly asked to be out of the home with work and other responsibilities, leaving part of the work of child rearing on the school itself and on the social worker. Good afternoon, everyone. So as new social workers are needed by 11% in healthcare, clearly there'll be a demand for supervisors for them. Advancing your career in social work might be a way for you to become a supervisor and thus grow. Not only maybe into counseling or specialized areas of practices, but perhaps even education. So, and the reason to do so may be financial. So, the median pay for social workers in May of 2021 was just over $50,000. But the median salary for those who were in a supervisory type role was approximately 62,000. So that's about 20% more. And then there are many supervisors who report incomes in the 88,000. That's over 50% greater than the social work profession that's just a single practitioner who's not working as a supervisor. So based on the data, you could increase your income by at least 20%, perhaps in a supervisory role if you were to take that on. And it's another way to potentially increase your earning potential. Now, supervisors take on, as someone said earlier, staff, and they also take on leadership roles. So these can be ways, again, for you to advance your career. It's usually that a master of social work in many states is instrumental to supervisory roles, but it's not necessary. But MSW programs do make people better, perhaps prepared to be supervisors because they typically cover the bigger picture issues within the industry and within social work as a body of work that would allow the supervisor greater ability to help perhaps the supervisee. But supervisors must be skilled in both social work, the profession itself and the doing of it, as well as leadership and administrative duties, because the work of a supervisor often centers on managing a team and keeping a team engaged. And it's primarily guiding less experienced social workers or those who may be under some sort of, censure or other, reason. The common task of social work supervision then would be delegating, wouldn't it? And designing casework. And that would be a huge part of that role. It would be training staff on the organizational and agency policies and procedures. It would be reviewing and approving treatment plans, leading staff in the organizational goals as well as their own personal goals, and evaluating their performance. These are all the roles and duties of a supervisor. So what y'all expect then is the effect of a supervisory role. Is that a short-term effect on the supervisee, or does it have a long-term effect? So are supervisees affected just only in the short term or in the long term by their relationships with their supervisors? Is the effect of the supervisory role short term or long term? Long term. Short term for credit at school, but professional relationships for a long time. Long term. Thank you all for answering our questions. Long term, it will affect skills to come. Well, data shows y'all that it is long term and that it has a long standing effect on the supervisee, on their professional development and their formation. And this effect can both stunt the supervisee or enhance the supervisee. The supervisory relationship is a foundational intervention itself in its own right, and it's also a tool for enabling more specific supervisory methods and interventions. So, identifying the competencies needed to supervise for licensure for the supervisee, determining the criticality of those competencies of the supervisee, identifying the KSAs within the supervisee to demonstrate those competencies, and linking those to the relevant KSAs in the real life workforce. It is the supervisor's responsibility to ensure that the supervisee provides ethical services to their clients. Ideally, this is done using a collaborative process, but ultimately it's the supervisor who must select the model by which this is done. And this is part of the activities of supervision. So those are, as we've discussed, administrative, which is oriented toward agency policy or organizational demands and focuses on the supervisee's level of functioning within that workplace and their work assignment or caseload. The supervisory role should educate, and this would be about both specific cases as well as overall on staff development and training to the particular caseload of the agency. And then the supervisor should be in a supportive mode with the supervisee, hopefully decreasing the job stress, which is underscored by a climate of safety and trust where the supervisees can develop their own sense of professional identity. So, social work, as we've discussed, and as you know, is deeply humanitarian. And it has the opportunity, or gives you, each of you, and God bless you for it, the opportunity to have profound effects, profound and positive effects on your clients. And so, in order to draw this out, supervisors again focus on leading, drawing out your social workers' talents and skills, consulting about what are the appropriate client needs, teaching, educating, partnering, working alongside, advocating. So, making sure the social worker can advocate for themselves as well as for their clients, and supporting, which is ensuring assistance, whatever that looks like. Now, supervisors typically must pass a clinical exam, and then many of them must have a master's. In Alabama, we have to pass an exam. The skills that are important to be measured in addition to those skills that can be measured on an exam are your ability as a supervisor to communicate, be able to discuss the concerns of your supervisees as well as their concerns for their clients, to model best practices. So you not only encourage and educate, but model best practices. You have to assess your own interpersonal skills because social workers, just as social workers work with different groups of people as clients, you'll be working with different people as social workers. Compassion is important to the supervisor to meet both the supervisee and their client with empathy. And then the organization skills necessary to manage many, many balls in the air with multiple social workers in multiple cases. So again, what is the role of the supervisee? Well, it is to influence, or the supervisor is to influence the supervisee, to help the supervisee, especially the new social worker, to understand the experience of doing social work and the meaning of the experience of doing social work. And I expect that many of you can speak to that. I'd love to, in fact, hear your thoughts about the meaning of the experience of social work. In fact, that might be the best question I've ever asked. What are your thoughts on the meaning of the experience of doing social work? A good supervisor will help you attain that and understand that. They'll also touch on any emotional hurdles that may be affecting you based on the immediate workload that you have. The supervisor is supposed to and is there to make you the best clinician that you can be, using skills unique to you, helping you to understand and unveil your own personal strengths and put those into effect with your client relationships. The supervisor is to offer practice advice, practical advice, as well as allowing experimentation within reason, provided there's no crisis with your client. In addition to offering advice on what the client may need, the supervisor would offer ideas on what has worked with similar clients in the past, along with what makes sense clinically and sharing resources. The supervisor would instruct the supervisee on how to implement the interventions that are arrived at, that are collectively or past experience knowledge. Would share that collective knowledge, and in doing so, show and value respect for the supervisee, treating them as a colleague, and then whereas together, working together collaboratively, if possible. In fact, the goal of the supervisor-supervisee relationship is to become more peer-like, so that each is sharing and learning from the other. So perhaps the new social worker has learned some new tricks of the trade in school that could be of value to the experienced supervisor, just as the supervisor's experience throughout their workload would be of value to someone whose work has mostly been theoretical to this point. And then the supervisor offers advice, encouragement, and assistance in navigating self-advocacy avenues for the supervisee. Let's see, I've got some good comments here. Real life situations are good to share, especially involving ethical issues, says Miss Jones. And then Tamika Teague says, my experience has been extremely meaningful. I view my role as a social worker as missionary work. I love that. It is your passion. Care Patrol is my mission. I get what you're saying. It's not always what I want it to be, but it is always that I feel like I'm making a difference, and that's why I'm here. So I so appreciate what you said, Ms. Teague. Thank you for saying that. The supervisor and the supervisee really sort of should approach four critical questions. So if you're looking for a supervisee, a supervisor, and you're a supervisee, you want to work with them to answer these sort of questions. What learning goals should we pursue? What approach to learning suits the circumstances that we're in, the practice and agency, the caseload? What type of relationship will work the best? So should we be more collegial or more top-down hierarchy? And what management processes do we wish to establish? And this would include many aspects, such as, for example, how to end the relationship. And we best serve by identifying the goals above with an eye to achieving specific outcomes below, keeping in mind that the purposes of supervision are to enhance the supervisee's knowledge and skills, integrating research and theory with practical life, monitoring the quality of those services and interventions, and then supporting the supervisee and their ability to self-reflect and self-soothe. What are the competencies necessary of taking on the supervisory role, y'all? What are the competencies necessary for taking on the supervisory role? And these were pulled from the same NASW and ASWB documents as the later documents. But what they suggest is that you, the supervisor, conduct a self-assessment, assess your style or the style that you'd like to employ, assess your ability to be interactional and how you'll relate to people in a learning and teaching capacity, as well as how you wish to communicate and work alongside folks. That would all be part of your self-assessment. You want to also assess your strengths and your limits, both personal and professional, and how those might come into bear or be brought to bear in the relationship. You want to assess your awareness of professional knowledge and values and attitudes. And then in establishing the relationship, you want to, first and foremost, and this is hammered again and again and again in the literature, is develop a contract. And it is necessary in the state of Alabama for you to have a contract to be a supervisor. The contract should state these things. The purpose of the supervision. Is it licensure, for example? The goals of supervision. Is it to teach a new interventional technique or series of techniques? Or is it to enhance the ethical practice of the practitioner? What is the goal of supervision? What are the roles, duties, and responsibilities, not only of the supervisor, but of the supervisee? So to someone's point earlier, there were probably, I don't know if the contract, when she got to working with folks and they wouldn't do what she felt that she wanted them, so she got very frustrated. I wonder if a contract was in place in which it delineated the roles of and the duties of and the responsibilities of the supervisee. This is very important for a healthy relationship. You want to define the structure and method of supervision. So, for example, is it face-to-face? Are you in the same office? Is it rotating face-to-face, just seeing each other a few times weekly? Or is it all done through television or telehealth, so to speak? And then what are the shared supervision, if any? So let's say that your supervisor only works in one arena in which you are looking to enhance your skills. You may need a second supervisor, or that supervisor may need a supervisor. And then the contract should obviously establish the fee structure and the length, frequency, and duration of the supervision. It should determine the modality, as we discussed, and you must document, both for the purposes of credentialing or licensing, as well as for tracking the supervisory role itself. The contract should specify the methods of evaluation, and it should not only establish the terms of termination, but also how those are to be reported. And then we want to develop an environment that enhances communication and reflects a growing working alliance between us as the supervisor and our supervisee or supervisees. But we still must establish and maintain boundaries. We want to monitor and address the interrelational dynamics of us with our supervisees, as well as with them with their clients and us with their clients. Addressing any thoughts or feelings or behaviors that may be at work, any conflicts or disagreements that may be at work. We want to manage our power and authority in such a way that, again, we're forging a collaborative or congenial relationship. We want to validate when a supervisee is effectively performing and provide constructive feedback, and then offer support in areas that need support. And we want to solicit and respond appropriately to feedback from the supervisee on the supervisory process and on our work. And then again, we want to manage the termination process of the role. So is termination due upon licensure? Is that due upon a certain monthly goal or just upon certain hours reached? How does that termination look? So what are the qualities needed to become a supervisor? What are the qualities needed to become a supervisor? Well, good social work supervision should be the application of practice, helping and teaching new social workers how to put into place what they know from school. The roles that supervisors take on are these: the supporter, in which the supervisor is offering support clearly on how the act of doing social work influences and affects the new social worker. And again, helping to explore the meaning of the experience of doing social work and the emotional hurdles faced. The supervisor, which is focusing on making the supervisee the best clinician they can be by helping them to draw out and put into place and put into practice their own unique talents and abilities that are specific to them. And by doing so, assisting them in becoming more and more comfortable, in which they can draw out more and more out of themselves and include more and more personal strengths and qualities in their relationships with their clients or consumers. The social work supervisor is also a case consultant who should offer clear advice on what perspective to take, while also allowing for experimentation with having named reasonable options in the case. So if there's no immediate crisis, the supervisor should encourage the supervisee to try their own way, so long as that is ethical and appropriate, as long as it is the good intervention. And so the best way maybe for the supervisor to achieve this would be ironically, in a sense, of telling the supervisee what the client really needs, whether or not that sort of falls into the bailiwick of what the relationship is supposed to be about. So the supervisor role is also one of teaching what's worked in the past, what's worked in practice, and then resources attendant to that, and then how to implement and watch and monitor those interventions. So the supervisor would not only share their own experience, which is most key, but also collective knowledge throughout the years of work that they've been doing supervised or social work rather. The supervisor is also a colleague. So one of the roles that we take on as supervisor is colleague, and you respect and treat your supervisee as a colleague, working collaboratively. And I can just tell you from having employees myself that I always view them as colleagues and not as employees, because to me, no one works for you; they work for themselves. You know, but they work for other people. They're not here for me. They're my colleague. We do the same thing. And I think if you can approach someone as a colleague, you'll get more work out of them because they see that you value and respect them as an equal, which they are, and not as someone there simply to get the job done or fill in a hole or whatever. And then lastly, the supervisor is meant to be an advocate for the supervisee, helping them to understand how to navigate the appropriate systems both within the agency as well as within the scope of practice and within the relationship and any hurdles faced with the client. So, what are the qualities needed to become a supervisor in Alabama? Do y'all know? I know someone touched on earlier that you must pass a course. Well, it could include this. You must be at the current level of licensure or at a specific level of licensure or above the level in which the supervision will be provided. And you must be licensed in that jurisdiction and having been in that jurisdiction for at least 24 months. You must have a degree from an accredited school of social work. In Alabama, if you have an LBSW, you can serve as a supervisor after 5 years in the field and after passing the test. If you're an LMSW, 3 years, and an LICSW upon clinical licensure, you can be a supervisor. In Alabama, it's required that the supervisee receive at least 4 hours minimum of supervision per week, and there are 36 months allowed in which that can accrue. The maximum needed is 96 hours, and all of those hours can be done through distance supervision. There is specified coursework in supervision, which must be passed. And there are continuing education hours, such as this one, for the maintenance of those credentials that must be updated every 5 years and approved by the licensing board. And there must be 3 continuing education hours in that span in supervisory practice. So this is one for you, and you will have another one later this year. We'll have a second, more in detail supervisory role CEU for you. Now, the person who seeks to be a supervisor must be free from sanction, of course, and must have experience and expertise within the practice arena and with the population of the supervisee's practice. So, for example, addictions. You must be competent in theories and modalities of treatment, and you must have knowledge of the principles of supervision and be able to demonstrate those skills. So in Alabama, there is a supervision contract that is required, and it must identify the parameters of the relationship, delineate any requirements between the two, the supervisee, the supervisor, ensure compliance with regulations, and ensure that there's a termination process, how that works, and how it will be reported, because it must be reported in Alabama. So it could include then the responsibilities of you and the supervisee, or you and the supervisor if you're the supervisee, the type of practice experience that you're trying to obtain under the supervisory relationship, the total number of hours that you're seeking to obtain, and there must be annual reporting at least to the licensing board by the supervisor. And then there are and then you must terminate the relationship with the board's knowledge. So you must report that. So what are the best practices for supervisors in the eyes of the NASW and the ASWB, which is the topic we suggested that we would be discussing in today's presentation? So standard one then is just having context of the supervisory role. So it's understanding the scope of practice. So is it for obtaining licensure, or is it for a social worker who's been sanctioned? What is the reason for their supervisory relationship? And it must also be one in which, if you're seeking to be best practice, if you're seeking to be a supervisor, you must practice within the community in which they live. And by that, we mean you must have insider knowledge. So you're very adept at, for example, adolescence practice, and you have insider knowledge. You know how to build therapeutic alliances, you know how to identify appropriate referrals and make your supervisee aware of these. And you have the ability to understand your client's concerns because you have experience with it. So this might result in dual or multiple relationships. Just be aware. There's cultural awareness that must be maintained, and that is necessary for the client population you're serving. There's interdisciplinary supervision, in which you may be supervised by a professional in a different discipline because you're seeking to gain knowledge in that discipline. And then there are dual supervisors. So again, you may have dual supervisors. You may have a conflict resolution process in which you need to delineate that again in your contract form. So you want to have a contract, as is required in Alabama, and it has to have mutually agree, or should have mutually agreeable goals, responsibilities, and most importantly, time frames. It must provide for regular feedback. It must establish, or should establish, a method for resolving communication or other conflicts or problems. And you should, as you're looking at creating the agreement, identify any feelings that the supervisee may have about the client populations that can interfere with the relationship. In terms of confidentiality, supervisees must let their clients know that they have a supervisory relationship and that they'll be reporting elements of that client relationship to the supervisor. Contracting must take place. And one of the things that you must look at as a supervisor is the risk that you're taking on as a supervisor. For example, the supervisee can dismiss you just summarily, especially if there are disagreements or conflicts and you haven't spelled out well how in the contract how to resolve those disagreements. The supervisee could blame the supervisor if they fail to meet the licensing that they're seeking. And then they may encounter case management conflicts between the supervisee and the agency. So you may be caught in the middle. So in terms of contracting for supervision, there should be elements that relate to confidentiality and reporting that outline the parameters of the relationship and provide for frequent written progress reports. The leadership model is one in which the supervisor models, so to speak, the behavior they wish the supervisee to emulate. Supervisees can learn about the internal and external environments in their workplace by watching the behavior of the supervisor. They should become aware of their limitations. So supervisors should always, again, seek another social work supervisor if they're not comfortable with with the arena in which their social work supervisee is practicing. They feel they're not competent in it. Oh, here's someone's comment. Thank you so much. Tamika T. I recently passed my LICSW exam and they have changed the requirements for that level. This is the updated information that I copied from the Alabama State Board of Social Work Examiners. An LICSW supervisor must have 2 years post-licensure practice experience. The board-approved supervisor shall supervise only those supervisees who provide services that fall within the supervisor's own competency. And that's what we're talking about here. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. So liability may be charged against you as a supervisor, particularly if your supervisee carries out inappropriate recommendations, particularly if those are to the client's detriment. It's also could be charged if the supervisee was just inadequate in their performance or inadequately prepared by you to perform. So liability of supervisors has been determined by the court. So again, your contracts stipulate this and understand the familiarity with the agency's practice and how those might conflict with your own. Now, we know that supervisors should be proactive in preventing any boundary violations, whether that's family or current or former partners or close friends, certainly no therapeutic relationships. And supervisors have vicarious liability because any incorrect acts or omissions by the supervisee reflect directly on the supervisor. And supervisees can be held to the same standard of care as you, their supervisor, because you are their supervisor. So you must make sure that standard of care is met by the supervisee as you have liability. So, for the purposes of risk management, supervisors should ensure that services provided to clients meet or exceed standards of practice. It's that simple. Maintain documentation of supervision in the role, monitoring the supervisee's work and practice and activities, and identifying and reporting any actions that may pose a danger. Documentation is always, in every case that we've ever discussed, the most important legal tool that can assist you in managing risk. You should assist your supervisees and regularly review their documentation standards and hold them to high standards. Each session, in fact, at supervisory should be documented not only by you, the supervisor, but also by the supervisee, and these should be then provided to the supervisee and to the board. And where appropriate, supervisors should train supervisees to document for reimbursement and claims. Now, other legal concerns for supervisors, particularly in a specialty area, might be that following disciplinary action, corrective issues to be covered in the supervision are shared, and social work supervisors may retain a consultant for a case consultation and review. Now, in terms of ethics, NASWB's ethics say that social workers who provide supervision should have the necessary knowledge and skill to consult appropriately within their areas of knowledge. 301B, social workers who provide supervision are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries. 301C, social workers should not engage in any dual or multiple relationships with supervisees in which there is a risk of exploitation. And social workers 301D who provide supervision should evaluate the supervisee's performance in a manner that is fair and respectful, and that is most important. Supervisees should address, or supervisors, excuse me, it is the supervisor's responsibility to address confusion that the supervisee may have about this process, and the supervisor should be aware of the differences between the professional ethics, core values, and moral beliefs of the supervisee and their clients, and of the supervisee and the supervisor, and help the supervisee when making clinical practice decisions. Supervisors should help supervisees learn ethical decision making, again, through the process of modeling that behavior, discussing consequences, cost and benefits of certain actions, and exploring interventions that achieve the best fairness and justice and respect for the parties involved, making decisions about actions, and then evaluating their implementation. And then when a supervisee makes an ethical mistake, reporting that to the licensure board. Boundaries, we know about boundaries. We cannot be in any sort of ethical boundary, romantic or familial. If a supervisor recognizes a potential boundary, they should resolve it, and avoiding providing psychotherapy services to the supervisee, and being consistent with the supervisee. In terms of self-disclosure, supervisors should only share personal information that is somehow supporting the goal of supervision and of the role and the job itself. So, talking about one's practice or one's experience, good or bad, could be helpful when talking with someone about a case that is specific to them. We wouldn't want to go into anything beyond that. And of course, the supervisor should help the supervisee understand workplace safety, including how to respond to threats and harassment and deal with assaults emotionally, given that social workers are so intricately involved emotionally in the lives of clients. Supervisors should help supervisees learn nonviolent response strategies so that they can mitigate crises that arise. And the supervisor should keep an eye out for whether a non-traditional social work intervention is best for a supervisee. It may be necessary to involve another supervisor, as we've said time and again, when there's an ethical dilemma. So technology should be understood as a general sense, and video conferencing is now used, for example, in Alabama for licensure. In terms of however the supervision is, given out, the evaluations should have some fairly common elements. There should be a formal agreement, as we've discussed. The tools that are used can be a combination of the supervisor's use of case studies, progress notes, conversations, successful past treatment plans, and successful past client outcomes. There should always be a procedure for ongoing feedback, written and verbal, and modifications based on that feedback should be allowed. Continuous feedback also helps determine the impact and the effectiveness of the supervision that's been received, and it may help address any future challenges that the supervisee may encounter once the relationship is passed. The goals of the evaluation process are simply this: to improve the delivery of services to clients and maintain ethical and competent social work practice while protecting the public. And that is the reason for the social work supervisor role. Now, terminating a relationship, the ending of a supervisory relationship is just as important as the beginning. So an ending might occur if the supervisor left the organization, was promoted, or the supervisee obtained licensure, or it may also simply occur if the goals that were in the agreement are achieved. It's important to identify when these will emerge and assist supervisees in dealing with this termination. In other words, with no longer having you as a support system. And all documentation by you should be completed by the time of termination. It is unprofessional and possibly unethical to withhold final reports, particularly for licensing. Two areas require attention: the termination of the supervisory relationship itself and the termination of the supervisee-client relationship. And there should be a smooth transition in both cases. And that is today's presentation. Again, our evaluation link today is https https://www.surveymonkey.com/r/all uppercase letters Y5 C as in cat 6 M as in Mary Y9, and our password is capital WORK work. Capital W, I have put the wrong thing in the password here. It's not will, it's work. The password is work. WORK. That's capital W, lowercase ORK. That is the password for today. I've read you the link. Thank you for being with us. Please join us on Monday. We will do a session on the Ombudsman program, which was also a topic asked for in the past. Thank you all for your comments. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for what you do. It is really, I want to hammer home that it's not social theory, it's not social studies, it's social work. And I appreciate the work that you as social workers do. It is voluminous. I think it is oftentimes thankless. It is overwhelming, the things that are in front of you, the things that you must keep in mind, the things that you must do. I am in awe of you as social workers, and I appreciate all of you for doing that. And for any of you who are in the supervisory role, God bless you, because it needs to be done, that the newer folks coming along learn from you and learn from your ability and learn from your ability to help others. So we thank you so much for what you do. Is the password working for anyone? No. All right, I'll tell y'all what. When we get out of this, I will, oh yes, it is working. So it's work, WORK, capital W, and then lowercase o, lowercase r, lowercase k, work. So the password is work, WORK, as you are social workers, and we appreciate you for it. Join us Monday for the Ombudsman program. And then again, we'll have a whole calendar every Monday this year for you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you do. Have a great week. Really good. Still on. I can't get it to undo. Y'all apologize. So thank you for being here again. Let's see if we can get this to work. Well, shoot, y'all.